So, looking at the dorsal surface, right, let's focus ourselves first. This is the nose, right? So if this was the poster for the movie Jaws, that. And so there's the nose. Here's the back of the head. This is dorsal. Here's ventral. And of course, this is all cartilage, so this is a chondrocranium. One thing that makes cartilaginous fishes different from other animals, other vertebrates, is that they have a roof to their chondrocranium. All other vertebrates have dermal bone making the roof, what we call the dermatocranium. So that's kind of unique here. And there's our roof. So here we see the nose. And one of the terms we see used for nose is rostrum. Like you think about a whaling ship and that thing they went out on to harpoon the whales, that long narrow thing that came off the tip front of the ship, that was called the rostrum. Okay, so this is the rostrum. Here's the pre-cerebral fenestra. Fenestra means window. In real life, there'd be a thin piece of cartilage here that's almost transparent, like the glass of a window. In fact, stupid fact, but in criminal terminology, when they're doing jury trials, the clinical term for killing someone by throwing them out the window is defenestration. This hole back here, epiphyseal foramen. Later on, you're going to learn that in your brain, there's a third eye. Okay, now this sounds like some metaphysical crap. But you have a third eye, which is actually the remnants of the early primitive vertebrates that had 3 eyes. It's now an endocrine organ. But in some animals, like this guy here, it still has an opening so it can receive photic stimulation. In fact, sunlight makes you make these hormones that come from that specialized gland. Then we get to all these holes here. All these holes here, which to me always reminds me of the eyelets. You could like tie shoelace through there. These are on the surface, so superficial. They're around the orbit, ophthalmic, foramina. Foramina is the plural of foramen. So, we know, you've got opticians, optometrists, and ophthalmologists. All of them work in your eyes. So superficial, ophthalmic for eye, foramen, each one individually, foramen is the plural. Now we get down in here, I know I'm flipping it soon, there they are. We can see the light coming through them because they're superficial. But anteriorly there's one that doesn't have any light coming through it because it doesn't go to the surface. So that is the deep ophthalmic foramen. Make sense? Continue on back here. Snout, eye socket, otic capsule for the ear. So here's our otic capsule. We have a ridge above it, supraotic crest. A linear elevation, right? Above the otic capsule, superior to. Just like we have a supraorbital crest. Okay? Get back here, we have an extension, a process behind the otic capsule, post-otic process. Okay? This is going to be a little hard to see, but if we look at our post-otic process, here it looks like we've got 2 bars and a little thin piece of cartilage in there, like a plane of glass, post-otic fenestra. And then there's a hole here too that comes in at an angle. That hole is for the glossopharyngeal nerve coming off the brain. So it's called the glossopharyngeal foramen. Here we see another hole. That's for the 10th cranial nerve, the vagus nerve. So that's called the vagus foramen. And then here's our larger hole. It's called foramen magnum, which means big hole. But that's where the brain and spinal cord connect. All right, and of course here we see an impression from the first vertebra. Then we got stuff here that's a little confusing. Up here we have this area where there are some depressions and openings. We have the perilymphatic and endolymphatic foramen. Not sure how well you can see that.
That's perfect.
But there's the hole. Hole, foramen means hole, right? So endolymphatic and perilymphatic. But what causes people confusion is, notice how there's a groove, a depression leading into the perilymphatic foramen. That's the perilymphatic fossa. Fossa means depression. When you were a little kid and Mufasa died, you were depressed. Anyways, well, some of you weren't, but I don't want to know about your childhoods. All right, so here, this thing that's all broken up should look like a sphere, should look like that big golf ball of the Epcot Center. And that's the olfactory capsule where the olfactory nerves are. And Ryan got to see that really good because the shark he was looking at, they left the olfactory nerves in place. And it misleads you, makes you think it's the eyes, but no. Okay, here we see our antorbital process, the process in front of the orbit. Our postorbital process here, also called the orbital shelf. Now we get to a bunch of little holes in here. Beginning with the easiest to see one, this big hole, what should be in this depression here? The eyeball, right? So what nerve communicates with the eyeball so you can see? You know it. Occipital, close, optic, right? You knew that. So what do you think this big hole is? Optic canal. All right, and of course we already saw our deep ophthalmic and our superficial ophthalmic. We got one here. That's the trochlear. And that's for a cranial nerve that helps to move the eye. We also have one here, which is another nerve that's going to move the eye, called the oculomotor. And then there's one next to it that is easy to confuse, except look how much bigger this one is. That's the trigeminal facial. And the reason why it's bigger is it actually is a passageway for two cranial nerves, the trigeminal and the facial. Now Ismail wants to ask me a question, will you need to know the names of the nerves on this practical? No. I'm just telling you them so the names make sense. Otherwise you're like, where the hell did that name come from? Would some mean anatomy professor just say, I'm going to make a name of a foramen that no one can spell right so everyone loses points on the exam? Yeah, probably. Remember the part of the hyoid that attached to the skull was the hyomandibula? This foramen is where a ligament joins them together called the hyomandibular foramen. And that's exactly where it connects. I think that's everything. Did I miss anything? That's pretty much it. Any questions? Anything you need to see again?